Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a place that's really far down the rabbit hole, Alice in Wonderland, where up is down and down is up, and there's not a lot of, at least, rational behavior coming from, unfortunately, a lot of my Republican friends, where one of the most important issues since I've been in the Senate, support for Ukraine, hangs in the balance, and support for our allies Israel, support for humanitarian aid for folks in Gaza, support for China and Russia, where we've gone through a week where for months my Republican friends asked for a strong border security bill, and the border is a mess. That bill was produced in a bipartisan fashion, led by a very conservative Senator James Lankford, only to have those same folks kill that bill, and then yesterday say, oh no, to process this we need to go back to border provisions, even though they'd rejected them earlier. So if you have a hard time following this, don't feel alone. On the other hand, I come from a rare burst of sanity, where the Senate just concluded voting on getting on the bill that would be national security alone, Ukraine, Israel, humanitarian, and China-Taiwan, with 67 votes. And that meant 17 of my Republican colleagues said, let's get on this bill. If we can hold anything close to that margin after we go through an amendment process, that will put, I think, the House in an extraordinarily difficult position if the Speaker, who seems to lose more credibility every day, doesn't at least allow his members to vote on this critical issue. And why critical? Because if we don't stand by Ukraine, Vladimir Putin will win in Ukraine. If we don't stand up now for Ukraine, Ukraine is literally running out of artillery shells. The ratio a week ago was they could send back one shell for every 5 shells the Russians bombarded. And you've seen recent attacks from drones and airstrikes on Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital. If we don't stand up now, the very credibility of NATO going forward will be undermined. And nation states like Sweden and Finland took bold steps to join NATO, but NATO could become toothless if America can't be counted on on its word. And virtually every member of the Senate has made that commitment early on in this conflict, and many of them, maybe because Donald Trump has tweeted otherwise, have run for the hills. That kind of American isolationism, I tell you, as the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, is not good for America. It's not good for stability around the world. It's not good for our economy. If people can't trust America to keep its word, then we've got challenging days ahead. So my hope is that we will stay in session until this is done. That's what I've urged the majority leader. Those who want to take a break or take another vacation or take a foreign trip, their primary responsibility is to stay here and get this job done in this critically important national security package. And again, I hope we continue to bring back border security. Border is a mess, and we've got to do more to secure the border and stop some of the programs that have been referred to as catch and release, so that literally we adjudicate these individuals at the border rather than putting them in this legal hiatus for years where we can't really follow what they do or what happens. So even though I started this with down the rabbit hole, we did have a burst of good news. Literally, I just got off the floor voting. One other item that I want to touch on, and then I'll throw it to Laura for questions, is the long-awaited FAA reauthorization got marked up in the Commerce Committee today. And there's a lot of good things in this bill. Increased consumer protections for particularly flyers, making sure that we get rid of some of the junk fees that airlines and others have put in place, increased focus particularly on safety issues. But one thing that is a real detriment to at least the greater Washington region was the Senate ill-advisedly added 5 new slots at Reagan Airport. This is an effort by Congress to micromanage the flow of traffic in and out of the only airport in the country they try to micromanage, which is Reagan. Obviously, many members who live in other states want to fly directly, even though there have been many reports that adding increased capacity at Reagan will be a safety hazard. And Senator Kaine and I, along with our Maryland colleagues, have been absolute that we will do whatever we need to do to stop this approach which would undermine safety at Reagan, as well as undermine frankly, some of the long-term financial viability of Dulles. So I think we saw in the House of Representatives where they did pass an FAA bill, and literally the regional delegation came together and took out all the slots increases at Reagan. We're going to try to work towards that or something very close to that here in the Senate as this bill goes to the next stage, hopefully at some point in terms of floor consideration. So why don't we stop there, and lots of other issues that we can discuss, but I wanted to give you those really fresh from the Senate floor and fresh from the Commerce Committee, literally actions that just took place in the last couple hours.
Senator, our first question will be Hannah Brandt with Nexstar. Hannah? Okay, we're going to move on to Stephanie Liebergen with Scripps.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Hannah, yep, you're up.
So sorry about that. I was having trouble unmuting. Thanks for taking my question. I know this might feel a bit obscure with everything else going on, but the FCC outlawed today robocalls containing voices generated by AI. I know that's an issue you've been really active on, really concerned about. What do you think about that decision?
Well, I think the FCC took the appropriate action. If we don't identify these deep fakes, whether they be in this form of robocalls, or frankly, if they are in terms of our images being represented on television or online, they'll have a harder problem dealing online. Mostly, FCC has more jurisdiction over the broadcast airwaves and telephony. We could be in a huge amount of trouble, particularly as I continue to worry that we may be looking at the perfect storm in terms of foreign interference in our elections this year. I am concerned for 4 reasons that we are less prepared today than we were 4 years ago. First, because you have nation states, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, but particularly Russia, who has a lot to gain if they interfere in our elections and undermine support for Ukraine. 2, in the past, what Russia had to do was try to raise sometimes crazy theories and undermine faith in our elections. And unfortunately, right now, there are a lot of Americans who've lost faith in a lot of our electoral systems. So the efforts of foreign actors to accelerate or amplify those concerns about faith in our elections is much greater today than it was 4 years ago. Third, and this is because there was a Fifth Circuit case that literally has held up any voluntary communications between the social media platforms and the FBI, the NSA, any of the folks who are involved in trying to warn Americans about malign influence. And if you can't even have voluntary conversations, then we could be in a heap of trouble if foreign actors continue to use social media platforms. And then back, Hannah, to your question, AI tools, whether it's fake voices, fake images, fake content, can be delivered at speed and scale now, unlike anything we've seen in the past. So it's hugely concerning. I think the FCC took the correct action. I still think we need to do more. I've got bipartisan legislation around, for example, manipulation in our public markets. I think we need to do more to protect our elections, but the FCC took the right step today.
Senator, our next question is Stephanie Liebergen with Scripps.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for taking the time today. I want to ask about the U.S. response to the attack in Jordan and the service members that were killed. And it's been, I guess, about a week since the U.S. started its attack, but the White House made clear that this was going to be something that was going to continue over multiple days, potentially even weeks. What more would you like to see the U.S. do in response? And do you think there's any risk of the U.S. responding too strongly and then having our adversaries attack us again?
Well, I think it was very appropriate that yesterday our strikes took out one of the leaders of one of these Iranian-backed Shia groups. And I think President Biden has made clear, and I think we should make clear, the United States will always choose the time and place to respond. But any group or any entity that strikes American forces, particularly when Americans have been killed as they were in Jordan, they will pay a price. And I think it is appropriate that we continue these actions. Again, for those of my colleagues who say bomb inside Iran right now, which I was just in the region and I had heard no voices in any country that thought we ought to get into a full-fledged war with Iran at this moment. But I would even point out that even President Trump, who threatened to bomb inside Iran, chose not to do that. And when he struck back and took out the Iranian Quds Force leader, General Soleimani, he did it 6 months later in Baghdad. So I do hope we continue long-term American policy, which is when we are struck, we will strike back, but at America's choosing in terms of time and place. Specifically, though, beyond just the Iranian-backed militia groups who've been constantly harassing our troops, I think we need to step up our response to the Houthis. This is more than just America. This is like an 11-member coalition. The Brits and the Americans have put military hardware in terms of planes into action. The Houthis are a group that Iran has some influence, but not direct control. They are a bit crazy in terms of not being, they're not great at governing, but they're pretty good at warfare. They fought against the Saudis for a number of years. I think we need to elevate our attacks against the Houthis to command and control, and not simply just their, in a sense, launching vehicles in terms of where they shoot the missiles or drones from. So good steps yesterday. I think this reaction needs to continue, and I think particularly on the Houthis, we need to even step it up further.
Senator, our next question is Tom Fitzgerald with WUSA 9. Tom? Okay, we're going to move on to Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for joining us. Apologies if you've already been asked about this. I jumped on a little bit late. I wanted to ask you about the decision coming out of the Commerce Committee in connection with Reagan National Airport. Do you know, is there a specified number of slots that have been added? And what's, if you could just expand on your reaction, which you're obviously opposed to this decision.
I think it is crazy that Congress tries to meddle in the individual activities at Reagan Airport. Congress doesn't meddle in any other airport traffic. This is decided by the FAA based upon working with all the airlines and safety concerns. So it has been reported that 5 additional slots were added at Reagan. There have been certain members that have been fighting for this, frankly, in many ways for their own self-interest. We, Senator Kaine and I, and the Maryland delegation has hung in tough that we oppose those additional slots because of just safety at National. National is already crammed to the brim, and adding 5 more coming and going flights to National puts it on a real strained basis, and I think will undermine safety, as well as undermine the deal that the region entered into 30 years ago or 40 years ago, maybe more than that actually, when we built Dulles, and then taking away some of the flights from Dulles undermines Dulles as well. So I remain optimistic. I've held up FAA bills in the past over this issue, and I want to compliment the delegation from the whole region in terms of what happened in the House. There was an effort to try to add lots of slots in the House, and at the end of the day, they all got taken out, and the status quo was maintained. So there will be many more chapters in this story to be written. I'm glad it was not more than 5, but even 5 is way too many coming out of the Commerce Committee.
Senator, our next question is Elizabeth Holmes with WTVR.
I sound like a broken record here, but we've been talking extensively about mail issues here in Richmond. I know you talked about this during your last availability, but wanted to know if you and your team had heard anything back from the Postal Service about this issue touring the facility that was in question in the letter that both you and Senator Kaine signed. Just wanted to know if there was any movement on that.
We are, this this is not my first rodeo with the Postal Service. I think I go back 3 or 4 years now where we had similar, but maybe not as egregious issues in the Charlottesville area. I'm in communication with postal leadership. I've made explicitly clear that they cannot duck a public hearing on this issue. Congress oversees the Postal Service. Virginians are customers of the Postal Service. They have an obligation to hear individuals' complaints. In addition, we've got the activities around the Sandstone facility. I can't get into all the details there. Suffice it to say there has been an Inspector General investigation, and we are working through how the changes at that facility, and we'll have more to say about that shortly. And then finally, in terms of the VA facility and the fact that literally 700 plus, I believe, of these tests were, some of them held up literally for months. That's just inexcusable. And thank God, in this case, the colon cancer checking that was being done by these tests was all early on. Nobody was put in harm's way. But we've got to have improved performance. And as I pointed out in one of these earlier calls, there was a similar episode in Phoenix where the VA had the same circumstance. But in that case, the VA had not re-upped its postage fees to make sure that the Postal Service could actually do the delivery. So we're getting to the bottom of what happened with what used to be called McGuire Hospital in Richmond, but more to come, I assure you. And I also want to just acknowledge, as I have many times, I wish this was just a Richmond-specific or Charlottesville-specific issue. The challenge the Postal Service has is recruitment and retention of employees. The Postal Service that used to be a pathway to middle-class living is not viewed that way anymore, unfortunately. So the Postal Service is having a real hard time recruiting and retaining. And the Postal Service model is still under huge stress as more and more folks do online communication or email. And then even some of the package services, the FedExes and the UPSs, they still rely on the Postal Service to do the last mile, oftentimes, at a very unfair financial deal. So we're going to ferret out, and if the folks in Richmond need answers and deserve answers, but there is a bigger structural issue here that is not just Richmond or Charlottesville focused.
Senator, our final question is Amy Knowles with the Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. I can't believe nobody's brought this up yet. There are 4 puppies from Virginia in this year's Puppy Bowl, but there's a controversy. 2 are on Team Rough and 2 are on Team Fluff. So which team are you pulling for, and do you have any advice for Virginians on how to make such an important decision?
Well, you know, what I'm not going to suggest Virginians do is necessarily follow. I just wonder whether Taylor Swift is going to weigh in on this, and that might move some Virginians. I hope Ms. Swift will probably just focus on the teams. Obviously, she's for the Chiefs. You know, I think I've in past Puppy Bowls leaned towards Team Rough, but I want to do a little more looking at the where these puppies came from, and I just wish, as you may recall, Amy, I think it was last year or the year before where it was pretty clear for me, because there were Virginia puppies that were some of the beagles that we managed to get out of the enormous captivity in Vigo. So I'll do a little more checking, but if you're pinning me to the wall right now, I'll be on Team Rough. And on that note, luckily, there was no additional tweet that I put out any time in the last couple of days that I wasn't fully aware of. So go back to where we started. You know, I think even though I felt like I've been through the looking glass in Wonderland the last number of days, you know, good news off the Senate floor today in terms of maintaining America's incredibly important role in world affairs. Thanks so much, everybody.